What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here for PackersNews.com, live on Facebook Monday afternoon, approaching Christmas Eve. Thought I'd jump on here after listening to Mike McCarthy after the Packers' shutout loss to the Minnesota Vikings on Saturday evening, putting a big lump of coal in Packers fans' stockings for the weekend. Thought I'd jump on and see if, what's on your minds, Packers fans, as they head into a final Week 17 matchup against the Detroit Lions. Tyler, Mike is not happy. Well, I would agree with that assessment. He was not happy with the performance of his team last night. There is little doubt about that. Merry Christmas Eve, Joan. Thanks for joining us. Fire TT and DC. Well, Joshua, as I put up on Twitter this morning, I understand the sentiment of, saying it's time for Ted Thompson to go. I generally, for the most part, agree with that sentiment. But Mark Murphy is the only opinion that matters in that regard, and I don't see Mark Murphy making any kind of move until Ted Thompson's contract is up, which is in 2 more drafts. Honestly, do you have left to ask? About questions about this team? It's always something to talk about. That's what the Packers do so well. Interest goes throughout the season, 365 days a year. Whereas Gilbert been all year, he has been on the practice squad. He flashed during the preseason, no doubt. And then they cut him and put him on the practice squad and brought him up, obviously, because of the injuries to Clay Matthews and Nick Perry. And I thought he acquitted himself pretty favorably last night. Hundley has been in McCarthy's QB school for 3 years. Yes, he has. I know it's funny. People keep harping on the idea that Hundley has been in the program for 3 years and he should be, coming out and playing like Aaron Rodgers, or at least better than he has. And I don't think there's any question that he has been a disappointment. I think that's an absolutely fair label to put on him. But I also think that people's expectations were a little sky high for this kid. He looked very good his rookie year in the preseason. But then, as we all know, last year he started somewhat unevenly and then got hurt. The ankle injury really robbed him of a lot of playing time. And then this year, he looked uneven again in camp, and now obviously was thrown into the fire. You're never really going to know on a quarterback until you see him in live action. And now they've seen him in live action, and they know they can win some games with him, but he is severely limited, and he obviously does not give them much of a chance to win at the quarterback spot. I tend to think they will be on the lookout this offseason for either a draft pick to come in and compete, and or even possibly a veteran, QB to come in and push some competition there. Because let's face it, Ted Thompson adhered to his draft and develop philosophy, and it bit him this year. They didn't want to go out and sign a Colin Kaepernick. They didn't want to go even this past offseason and bring in maybe a Ryan Fitzpatrick or a Case Keenum, and it absolutely cost them a shot at the playoffs. Brett Hundley's limitations, his on-the-job training, cost them enough games that, they had to play all the kind of games they did trying to get Aaron Rodgers back on the field, and by then it was too late. What are your opinion? What are the chances of wholesale changes to the front office this offseason? Minimal, very minimal. Win games, they beat 3 of the worst teams. They're all NFL teams. Now, you don't get to choose your schedule. I know people love to discount it because of the record of the teams they're playing, but if the NFL has shown you anything week in and week out, it is a week-to-week league. You just got to win the games that you are on the field for. Now, Hundley has done a very poor job of leading the team at home. He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass the entire season in Lambeau Field, which is kind of unbelievable considering the fact that you are at home. You have the advantage of the crowd noise not being there, and you're able to manipulate whatever you want at the line of scrimmage, not to mention all of the rules put in place by the NFL favor the offense. At least most of them do anyway. And the fact that you can't throw a single touchdown pass in 5 games is kind of mind-blowing. With that said, this idea of discounting his accomplishments because they came against lesser competition, that's all well and good, but it doesn't really mean much. That's kind of box score scouting. I'd much rather look at the tape and see what he did and didn't do. And, you can say, yeah, he beat the bottom feeders of the league, but he also played pretty darn well against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are a Super Bowl contender. like I said, it's a week-to-week league, and you got to look at the tape and his actual play. Looking at the records of the teams he played against doesn't help you a whole lot. I'm seeing more NFL analysts criticizing Ted Mike. Well, that's the nature of the game. Once you get exposed a little bit after Aaron Rodgers goes down and your team can't win a game, especially at home. That's the nature of the beast. It's going to happen. Did they miss the playoffs because Brett Good got hurt? That's a good one. Aaron, do you think we'll release Matthews? No, Jake, I don't. I think they will restructure his deal and give him an extension, maybe of 2 years, maybe 3, and spread that money around. I think he'll get it eventually. They just won't all, I don't think they can go into next year paying him whatever. I think it's some ridiculous amount. Is it 15? Some ridiculous amount. They're not going to do that. But they will, in lieu of releasing him, I think they will give him an extension and drop that number down and just spread the money out. Bring in Elliott Wolf. Well, Kevin, they don't really have to bring him in. He's already there. But the question would be, would Ted Thompson step aside for the ascension of Elliott Wolf? And, I know Elliott is the hot name on Packers fans' lips, mostly because it's a familiar name that a lot of people know, and obviously we all know what his dad did. But you got to remember, Mark Murphy's the one making this call, and I have to think, more than anything, Murphy would want to go with someone a little older, a little more seasoned, been around the league for a little bit longer. And I tend to think, Russ Ball is much more of a possibility if they stay inside to get a general manager. That's not necessarily a pick I would agree with, because I think you should have a scout at heart in the general manager spot. But, and Russ is obviously well-versed on the financial side, but has not really made his bones on the personnel side. But that's Murphy's call. And no one really knows how he feels about Elliott Wolf. I mean, the Packers, as an organization, have made it clear that they want to keep him around, seeing as they keep giving him raises year after year and promoting him year after year. But, eventually he's going to land one of these jobs he keeps interviewing for, and, at that point it'll be too late. More in depth why you're on the let Ted go train now. Oh, Julian, sure, a little bit. Ted Thompson obviously is coming under fire, as Jessica said, a lot more. And I have been a pretty stalwart defender of Thompson's for a long time. And, looking at the roster over the course of the last 2 years and watching the decisions that have been made as far as who to re-sign, who to let go, who to bring in free agency-wise when you're trying to kind of stretch your legs a little bit, and the decisions throughout the last couple drafts, you put it all together and you couple it with this young burgeoning group underneath Ted, who have been around for a long time, and this adherence, the strict adherence to draft and develop, wanting to use your guys. This kind of almost, not inability, because he's shown plenty of times that he has, absolute ability to see value on the open market in free agency. Obviously, Charles Woodson was a home run. Julius Peppers was a great signing. But in the last 2 years, I'd say the last, 2 cycles, so to speak, he keeps getting it wrong. And obviously, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, who is suggesting which moves and which ones he's turning down, which ones he's going with, which ones are his ideas, which ones are his lieutenant's ideas. I tend to think the signing of Brooks and Dial and going after the 49ers when they knew that their defense was going to be dismantled because of the coaching change and the scheme shift, I'm pretty sure that was the guys underneath Ted. And they lobbied for that, and they won out. But if you look kind of at the decisions that have been made, and you keep finding, these decisions that have been made that lead to, looking back, they just don't add up. And he keeps getting it wrong. Like I said, whether it's taking the hard line on Jared Cook, the Hyde and Hayward walking out and playing exceptional football elsewhere. I've always said, I understood why they let Hayward walk. But Hyde never made any sense to me, considering their organizational philosophy. The Jared Cook thing, and then turning around, and obviously Martellus Bennett blew up in their face. It's hard to reconcile watching Jared Cook and how he really turned the offense around as soon as he was healthy last year. Why the hard line needed to be taken, I just don't understand for a player who has lots of, baggage, let's say, off the field. A real talent. I thought the signing was a good one as far as Bennett on the field. Didn't really understand why they went all hardline on Cook. And then, there's the drafting continuously over the years of all this defensive talent that for, the Mike Daniels and the Kenny Clarks of the world, which have been, good players, good solid players. And I think Kenny Clark is on the cusp of stardom. And I understand they draft at the bottom of the round every year. I get that. But there have been no difference makers brought in. Outside of Charles Woodson and Julius Peppers, on the defensive side of the ball, the last time that I can remember that Ted really found a difference maker was when he traded back up into the first round to get Clay Matthews back in 2009 or 8, whatever it was. It's been a long time. And his team has desperately needed a difference maker on that side of the ball. Now, obviously, things like Nick Collins getting injured, all those things, those happen, and that's life in the NFL. But it just seems to me that, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, this turnabout and thinking it's time to move on from Ted is not out of the blue. It may appear that way to some of you, but if anyone's been following closely, remember, it goes back to the Miles Jack, passing on Miles Jack a couple years ago. And that's when I wrote, Ted Thompson is going to ensure that his current team is always falling short because of the fact that he's always looking down the road and ensuring that the future is taken care of. And I tend to think that's what kind of happened with the TJ Watt, the passing of TJ Watt for Kevin King and Vince Beagle, which is ultimately what that turned out to be. I agree. I've said all year, you've got to wait 3 years to judge whether that was, a mistake, to give a final grade on that move. But once again, it shows a general manager who's very content to ensure that he's taken care of down the road. While I don't think you can't deny that TJ Watt could have helped this team in 2017. This team is desperate for anyone who can win a one-on-one on the outside, and they have been for 2 years. And even if it's not TJ Watt, this was a draft filled with pass rushers that they waited until day 3 to address. It's just, you add it all up, and then there's it's a cosmetic thing, but it's a very real thing in today's NFL. That shot of Ted last night in the press box with his mouth agape for a good, what felt like an hour, but was really actually like 10 seconds. That's the head of your football program on national television in a game where your offense can't score a point because of the quarterback that he has supplied to back up the franchise QB. It's just bad optics. And I know a lot of people, most people here will most likely say, that doesn't matter. It does matter. That is an advertisement for your program. Other players around the league are watching that and thinking, what in the world is going on? Other evaluators around the league are watching that and going, oh gosh, what is that, Ted? People who maybe down the line could help this franchise, maybe, somehow come open for, there's a job opening and you want to go get somebody and they're, remember that image of Ted with his mouth hanging open on national TV, and I don't want to be associated with that. I mean, that's all, speculative and anecdotal, and I get that. But optics matter. In this day and age where everything is consumed in real time, that is a real that's a real component of the job. And the fact that Ted Thompson, is nowhere near the public for a long stretch of the season. For a team that likes to lean on their, the idea that they are publicly owned, right? Oh, we're so publicly owned, give us your $200 every couple of years when we make the stock available. Oh, and by the way, the guy who makes all the decisions, you're never going to hear from him. He's totally not accountable for what it is, the decisions he makes or doesn't make, or what moves he makes or doesn't make. It just seems incongruous to me. Now, I've talked a long time, and I understand this is probably boring for a lot of you. Maybe some of you are yelling at your computer, maybe tip-tapping on the comment section. You may disagree. Totally get it. It's just an opinion. It's just how I see it currently, looking at it through the lens of the last 3 or 4 years. I understand there's a lot of opinions out there, a lot of opinions that probably don't agree with me, and you are allowed your opinion. I'm allowed mine. Totally cool. But that's where I am on Thompson. I just think he hasn't got it right in a long time. I mean, he's gotten something, there's a Jari Evans signing. That's something that doesn't get talked about ever. I thought that's a great move, and that's something that's proven out to be a really good move. But it's a product of letting TJ Lang walk, cutting Josh Sitton. You're bleeding this talent, and that's a Band-Aid. That's a successful Band-Aid, but it's a Band-Aid. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. Anyway, just sorry that was really long, but that's, like I said on Twitter, that's something you can never explain in a tweet, obviously. But there it is. That's laid out, and I didn't do a very good job of it, but kind of got some of it out there. This is why they don't let me write, because I would just write forever. Merry Christmas, John. Thanks so much for joining. Ted had his time. He did a good job. Now it's time to move on. It's kind of how I feel. Does Cobb want out? I don't think so. I know he was very despondent last night. I think he was pretty upset. He was pretty embarrassed by, the effort and the play that they put on the field as an offense. The fact that they didn't score a point yet again for the second time in a year. I think he was obviously emotional, obviously upset. I don't think he wants out, though. I think he loves playing in Green Bay. I think he loves playing with Aaron Rodgers. Just a frustrating time for everyone in that locker room. Total opposite of what you've been saying all season. No, it's not. No, that's why I said if you're paying attention. I just try to look at everything in and of itself. Each decision that gets made, like when people start complaining about the Hayward move, I will step up and say, in the context of where they were at the time, the Hayward move made sense, letting him walk. So that people interpret that as, oh, you're defending Ted Thompson. No, I'm defending that move because it made sense. But then people interpret that as, oh, he's a Thompson supporter. He thinks Ted Thompson's the greatest. I get this all the time. I get emails, I get tweets, messages on Facebook. Why are you carrying the water for the franchise? Why are you such a yes man? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no. I try and look at each decision and try and look at everything, in context and give a little bit of perspective. But that doesn't mean that, that I haven't seen warts and problems and issues, and I try to call those out when I do. And the other thing is, you got to remember, I haven't been calling for Ted Thompson's head all season because you got to let it play out. You got to let things play out. In the middle of the year, when everyone wanted Thompson fired because of Brett Hundley had played like 2 games. You have to let him play out. You didn't know the result. If Brett Hundley turns it around and develops and all of a sudden starts lighting it up, then everyone's like, oh, Ted Thompson's freaking amazing. What a genius, Because the quarterback he picked in the 5th round played well. But that obviously didn't happen. That on-the-job training cost them a shot at the postseason. That's draft and develop gone wrong, essentially. And now that has played out, we can talk about it. People want people fired like every week. I'm sorry. I don't fire people every week. I think that's just silly. But now, towards the end of the year, after the season has played out, now I talk about it. Nagler for GM. Nobody wants that. Trust me. Nothing changes as long as Murphy is in place. Bill, I tend to think you're right. I do think Dom Capers is probably gone, but outside of that, I think everything else will stay the same. Is Hundley good enough to be a backup? Well, we talked about it a little bit before. He's serviceable. I think they've got to improve at that spot, though. You've now let him play and, quote, develop. And, he's shown flashes, but nothing consistent. And he pretty much, like I keep saying, he pretty much cost you a shot at the postseason. So, yeah, is he good enough to be a backup in Green Bay, I guess, because he knows the system? But I don't think there's another team in the NFL that would take him. I mean, certainly nobody's going to trade for him. Let's see. Gene, thank you for saying so. Very nice. I'm just, like I said, it's just my opinion. Hundley's bad. Michael with the breakdown. Everyone at the stadium said the same thing as what you said. Well, that's probably not a great thing for me, but thanks. Get Jackrabbit from New York. He's a hell of a player, no doubt about it. How is 0 points serviceable, though? Well, Sean, you know, it wasn't just Hundley out there, right? I would put the Ravens game on him, sure, fine. Last night, you can't put that all on Hundley. I mean, there were 7 drops. I mean, he throws a perfect ball to Michael Clark in the end zone that Michael Clark can't throw, like, can't haul it in. That's not on Hundley. That's what I mean. Like, you can't just box score scout. You got to look at the tape, look at the context. What is wrong with Trevor Davis, Jared? I don't know, but man, talk about a kid who is not, outside of that one return in Cleveland, a kid who has not kind of, you know, grabbed an opportunity when it presented itself. That deep ball last night was, I mean, what was he doing? It was like he wasn't even expecting to be thrown to, and then the ball's right in front of him and he doesn't make an effort for it. You're the deep threat. You're the speed guy. You got to be ready for those shots, right? You'd think. It's just, I have a hard time seeing him on the team next year, but that's just me. Why doesn't Ted Thompson not do any press conferences? Because he doesn't have to. He does the bare minimum required by the league. And the Packers have made it clear that that's not going to change. Thought Clark looked good overall. I agree. I thought, you know, people don't understand how raw that kid was and probably still is, but he's an athletic freak. And if they can get him, you know, another offseason, see what he's got next summer, you know, he could be a real matchup problem for opposing teams. He's big and athletic, and although it didn't show last night, I do think playing, you know, in sub-zero temperatures your first time out probably had something to do with it. Even though you did see the diving catch, which was really nice. Yeah, he could be a legit problem for opponents to match up with. If he could get some, you know, kind of the nuances of the position down, he could have a bright future. Fisher in for Capers. Alberto, I don't see that. Martinez is excellent defensive talent. Oh, man, I don't know about that. I think he is probably the most improved player on the team. I'll definitely agree with that. I think he's been active sideline to sideline. I think he's brought real energy to the defense, but he's still problematic in some areas, especially in zone coverage. You know, and he suffers from that thing where he comes up and tries to make a stop and is carried for 2 or 3 yards nearly every time. But I think, yeah, he's one of the most improved players on the team, definitely the most improved on the defensive side. And he's an asset. I agree with that. Who does Mark Murphy answer to? Matt, technically the executive committee, but really, not really anyone. Disappointing year for Allison? I mean, there have been drops and injury, what have you. I don't know, he hasn't had much of an opportunity. I tend to think he just needs to play more. But it's hard when you're stuck behind that top 3. But we'll see. Maybe something shakes out this offseason if someone walks and maybe he gets more time. But it's hard for me to call it a disappointment when you're the number 4 wide receiver on the squad. You know, last year, some of his biggest moments down the stretch came because other guys were injured, and that's why he was getting playing time. He just didn't have a ton of opportunities this year, especially with Hundley at quarterback. I tend to think if Rodgers had been in there throughout, he would probably been a little bit more productive. How will the team address all the recurring injuries? Well, they'll study it, much like they do every offseason. I tend to think they'll write it off as a 1-year kind of aberration. I keep telling anybody who will listen, I know everyone thinks they're the most injured team, but statistically, even they're not close. Especially after 2014 when they changed their the dietary stuff they were doing and changed their schedule, the practice schedules, whatever, for rest, you know, to add additional rest and recovery. They've really kind of turned it around. That said, this year was brutal. This year was as bad as it's ever been. So they will undoubtedly look at it and look at every aspect of it, but I don't expect big wholesale changes or anything to, the strength and conditioning group. Why are all these fans horrible? No one remembers the 70s and 80s. No one knows how lucky we've been. I think, that's a can of worms you're opening there. I do think there is a large segment of the fan base that is pretty spoiled, but it's only because they're young and they don't know anything else. Like you just mentioned, the 70s and 80s. Anybody who was around that time watching, the likes of Randy Wright or David Whitehurst, we remember how bad it was. And I was mentioning to a friend last night, I remember when the Packers beat the Vikings at the end of the year and they almost made the playoffs. They didn't make the playoffs, but they almost made the playoffs, and it felt like they'd won the Super Bowl. That's how bad it was. So now, people have gotten used to annual playoff appearances and brilliant quarterback play, and when they don't have those things, they act out and they lash out, especially on this day and age of social media. If that's all you're used to, it's hard to say you're spoiled because you never knew anything else, and you're just about to get some of that perspective, But, the Packers fans, for the most part, they expect excellence, and it's hard for me to sit here and say you shouldn't expect that, But then again, everybody's a fan in a different way. I mean, you be a fan however you want to be. If you want to sit back and think, this team's doing pretty well, and we've had a great run, and we're blessed to have, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers back to back, etc. That's how you are a fan. Great. Now, if you're a fan that expects them, they should be contending every single year, and blah blah blah. You want to be angry about it. Be angry about it. I'm not here to tell you how to be a fan. Be however you want to do. I keep my job because people like you come and tap on your Facebook comment. I love it. It's just an opinion, man. No, we expect change. Well, Mike, you can expect change. Now, like I keep saying, though, it's up to Mark Murphy, and I don't see wholesale changes coming. Now, maybe Dom Capers loses his job. That's the big question mark. But outside of that, I don't see much changing. Rodgers will be back next year, and they'll be back to probably winning 10, 11, 12 games. What do the Packers do post-Rodgers? Oof, that is a very good question. And it's something that they're going to have to fret over in a couple years. But right now, I think it's still a little early to be worrying about that. 1 or 2 more years. Rodgers has got a good 5-6 years left. Those are my favorite. We have only 3 Super Bowl appearances with 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks since 1992. Only 3 Super Bowl appearances. It's incredibly rare, and the Super Bowl is incredibly difficult to get to. There's so much I could say, but I won't, because I understand people are passionate about it, and if you want to view it like I was just saying, if you want to view that as a disappointment, that's how you're a fan. That's great. That's how you enjoy the Packers. That's the consolation prize mentality you spread. I'm alone in doing that. Got it. Tony Romo for head coach? That's not going to happen. Has the number of injuries along the offensive line given experience to the young guys? I think so. I mean, Justin McCray, I tell you what, McCray played so well that he made Don Barkley expendable. I mean, they kept Don Barkley around because they thought they were going to need him. And then McCray came in, played his heart out, and, they said, well, we don't need Don Barkley anymore, I thought McCray was one of the biggest surprises of the season, especially considering how poor he looked in the preseason. He did not have a good summer at all. None of those guys did, really, along the backup line. But man, he played lights out. He played pretty darn well all year when thrown into the fire, and especially last night. That guy prepped all week to play right guard against the Vikings and their front, and one of the best defenses in the NFL. One play into the game, all of a sudden he's pushed out to right tackle, and he's got to protect the quarterback. And he did a good job. I went back and watched the game this morning, and he did a very good job out there at right tackle, as he had done previously this season. So, man, they found something there. So, yeah, I think the injuries, while frustrating, definitely allowed some of those guys to get valuable reps. Yes. How does Mike McCarthy and Ted Thompson's contract situations complicate things? I think it does a little bit, because McCarthy's will be entering the last year of his deal, and Thompson is contracted through 2 more drafts. So I tend to think Thompson will give McCarthy maybe like a 2-year extension this summer. I can't imagine they go into next year with McCarthy as a lame duck. It would hang over the franchise all year long. Like I said, I do think that they will give him an extension this summer. What do the Packers do with an underperforming Nick Perry? There's not much they can do. They paid him, and when he's out there, he's not exactly lit the world on fire. But I tend to think they knew what they were getting. They didn't. People got to remember, when they paid Nick Perry, I mean, yes, it was a lot of money, etc. But it's nowhere near like what the premier guys are getting, like Von Miller, what have you. I mean, yes, it's a lot of money, and yes, he's underperforming. But it's a contract they can live with, and he is still a valuable player. He's a guy who plays the run extremely well, and when he gets the right matchup, he can be productive when it comes to getting to the quarterback. But I don't think you could say it's been anything other than disappointing this season, what they've gotten from Nick Perry. Love the common sense way you look at things. Thanks, Danny. Nice of you to say. As an outside linebacker, Perry is a great run stuffer. That is true, Randall. Pepper's stats are better than Perry. Yeah, Jason, that's true, but the Peppers thing, you got to remember, I'm not even sure that he would have come back if they had wanted him to. I think he wanted to retire in Carolina, and he's playing in a 4-3. That's where he made his bones, when he came into the league. He is probably one of, he's in the conversation with Reggie and some of the best 4-3 DNs of all time. So, yeah, I can't kill Thompson for that one. It's frustrating to see him down there in Carolina playing well, although I saw he got hurt earlier today. But, I'm pretty sure talking to people around, both in the locker room and around the team, it sure sounds like he wanted to go home, basically. Did not like the skull chants. Yeah, Brian, that kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier about, optics, and I can't imagine how it felt for Mark Murphy to be sitting there in a stadium that was pretty much emptied of Packers fans at the end there and filled with Vikings fans chanting skull. That's the tough pill to swallow. So, especially after a week after you've been splashed all over the papers going down your new toboggan hill in an inner tube. Optics. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Thanks, Nicole. Merry Christmas to you too. And Merry Christmas to everyone. To quote our president, even the haters. I hope you all have a great holiday. It seems like a great place to end. Thanks a lot, everyone. I will be back at some point this week. I keep forgetting what day it is. But I hope you all have a great holiday. And make sure you're checking PackersNews.com for all the latest on your favorite team. And I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.